Can you be my friend for just one day? That's all he said. 8 small words trembling in the cold morning air behind an Italian restaurant on the edge of a quiet American town. The smell of espresso and cigar smoke floated through the lot where a few Mafia men were leaning against their black Cadillacs, their polished chrome catching the early sun. It was their usual spot before a long day of business. The laughter, the quiet conversations, the hum of deals being discussed. Nothing about that morning seemed unusual until the small voice broke through. They turned. By the fence stood a boy, maybe 10 years old, skinny, pale, with one arm wrapped in a cast covered in doodles and faded signatures. His other hand clutched a wrinkled piece of paper. His sneakers were muddy, his backpack torn, his eyes too old for his age. For a moment, no one spoke. Don Vittorio, the boss, broad-shouldered, gray beard, expensive leather gloves on his rough hands, watched him carefully. The kid looked scared, but not lost. More like someone who had already decided he had nowhere else to go. "What did you say, kid?" Don Vittorio asked. The boy swallowed hard. "Tomorrow's friendship day at school," he said. "We have to bring a friend." "I don't have any." The conversations around the lot faded. Espresso cups froze mid-air. Someone muttered, "Did he just say he doesn't have a friend?" Don Vittorio took a slow breath. He'd seen plenty in his life. Deals gone wrong, funerals, betrayals, but never a boy asking a group of Mafia men to be his friend. The kid stepped closer, holding out the paper. "I drew this," he said quietly. Don Vittorio took it, a crayon drawing. Black luxury cars lined up under the words, "My friends." A family crest was there too, messy but clear. "You drew this?" Don Vittorio asked. The boy nodded. "They said, 'Mafia men are dangerous. But you look nice.'" The group went silent again. For men used to judgment and fear, hearing those words from a trembling kid felt like being hit in the chest. Don Vittorio knelt, eyes level with the boy. "What happened to your arm?" "I fell off a bike trying to show the boys I could ride." He looked down. They laughed, called me Metal Boy. Said, "Nobody wants a broken friend." One man cursed under his breath. Another shook his head. Don Vittorio studied the cast, cracked, worn, covered in childish signatures. "What's your name?" "Eli." "Well, Eli," Don Vittorio said, "you got guts walking up to us like that." Eli shrugged. "My grandma says I don't think before I do things." That earned a few chuckles. It broke the heaviness for just a second, but Don Vittorio saw something deeper in those eyes. Not just sadness, but hope, fighting to stay alive. He looked at his men. "So the kid needs a friend for a day." Bruno, the biggest of them, grumbled. "You serious, Don? We can't just roll up to a school, they'll call the cops." Another man laughed nervously. "Imagine 70 Mafia men showing up for Friendship Day." But Luca, the oldest, leaned forward. "Doesn't sound like anyone else is showing up for him." That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Don Vittorio looked back at Eli. "Where's your mom, kid? She works all the time." "2 jobs." "Your dad?" Eli's face changed. He left. No one said a word after that. Don Vittorio reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small gold signet ring with the family crest engraved on it. He placed it in Eli's good hand. "Consider this a loan," Don Vittorio said. "You're under our protection today." Eli's eyes widened. "For real?" "Yeah, for real." A flicker of a smile appeared on the boy's face. Small, shaky, but enough to melt the whole yard. "So?" he asked hopefully. "You'll come." Don Vittorio hesitated. He knew the headlines that could follow, the looks, the rumors, but then he remembered his own childhood, being the kid who didn't fit anywhere. He nodded slowly. "We'll see, kid." That was all Eli needed. His eyes brightened, his shoulders straightened, and for the first time that morning he looked proud. "Thank you," he said softly. "Even if you don't come, thanks for listening." He turned to leave, walking down the street with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. When he reached the corner, he stopped, looked back, and waved. Don Vittorio raised a hand in return. No one spoke until the boy disappeared around the block. Then Salvatore muttered, "Damn kid's braver than most grown men." Bruno snorted. "Yeah, but we can't just show up, Don. You know how people see us." Don Vittorio didn't answer. He kept staring down the empty road, the drawing still in his hand. He saw himself in that boy, the hunger for belonging, the quiet ache of being unwanted. Finally, he whispered almost to himself, "Friendship Day. What a joke." The others went back to their cars, pretending to be busy, but their faces had changed. Something had cracked open in that lot. Something nobody expected. A little boy with a broken arm had walked into their world and left a mark they couldn't shake. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for pity. He just wanted to belong, even if only for one day. And behind that restaurant, under the smell of espresso and cigar smoke, a group of men who thought the world had already judged them began to wonder what it would mean to show up for him. Because maybe deep down they remembered what it felt like to be that kid standing alone, hoping someone, anyone, would say yes. The lot stayed quiet long after Eli disappeared down the street. The car engines were off now, and the only sound was the wind brushing against the row of black Cadillacs. For once, the men who usually filled the morning with laughter and business talk had nothing to say. Don Vittorio leaned against his car, arms crossed, eyes lost somewhere far away. The crumpled drawing still rested in his hand. The paper was soft now, smudged from his thumb. He kept looking at it, tracing the crooked lines of cars drawn by a boy who just wanted to belong. Bruno broke the silence first. "You're not really thinking about it, are you?" Don Vittorio didn't answer. "Come on, boss," Bruno said, shaking his head. "We show up at that school, it's over. Cops, parents, cameras. We'll look like we're threatening a kindergarten." Luca lit a cigar and blew smoke toward the morning sky. "We already look like threats," he said quietly. But that kid didn't see it that way. Salvatore, the youngest of the group, adjusted his tie. "Kid's gutsy. Reminded me of myself before I learned better." Don Vittorio finally spoke. "Before you learned what?" Salvatore shrugged. "That people don't care, Don. You grow up. You stop asking anyone to show up. That's how it goes." Nobody replied. The words hung in the air, raw and familiar. Don Vittorio's voice softened. "That's the problem, Salvatore. The kid still believes someone might." He looked back down at the drawing. 70 cars, a sun in the corner, stick figure men in dark suits, childish, messy, pure. Luca exhaled smoke through his nose. Maybe it ain't about the school. Maybe it's about the kid knowing somebody listened. Don Vittorio nodded slowly. Maybe. But listening ain't the same as showing up. That sentence hit them all. They'd all known people who talked big and disappeared when it mattered. They'd all been left behind at some point by friends, by family, by the world. Don Vittorio stuffed the drawing into his jacket pocket and pulled out his car keys. "Let's take a drive." "Where?" Bruno asked. "Nowhere in particular." They drove. V8 engines roared to life, filling the small town with deep rumbles. Windows rattled, birds scattered from power lines. But the noise wasn't for show. It was to think, the only way these men knew how. They drove through the quiet streets past the elementary school Eli had mentioned. The building was small with faded paint and a playground that had seen better days. Don Vittorio slowed down as they passed, looking at the empty yard. He imagined what tomorrow would look like, the kids pairing up, laughing, shouting, and Eli standing alone, pretending not to care. Don Vittorio's chest tightened. They drove on, heading toward the edge of town where the road stretched wide and the air smelled like open country. The drive was silent. No music, no talk. Just the hum of powerful engines and the rhythm of thoughts none of them said out loud. When they stopped at a gas station miles away, Don Vittorio didn't get out of his car right away. He just sat there staring at nothing until Luca walked up beside the window. "You're thinking about him," Luca said. Don Vittorio gave a small laugh. "You'd think I was the one with a broken arm." Luca smirked. "Maybe you are, just not the kind that needs a cast." The line made Don Vittorio grin for a second, then fade. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how we scare people until they need us?" Luca nodded. "Yeah. Then we're the heroes for 5 minutes and back to villains again." That kid didn't see that. "Nope." Luca tossed his cigar. "That's what makes it hurt." They stood there for a moment, the sound of the wind mixing with the faint rumble of traffic. Back at the social club that evening, the rest of the crew had gathered again. Same leather chairs, same cups of espresso, but the energy had changed. Nobody talked about business or territory. The conversation kept circling back to the boy. Bruno was pacing near the bar. We shouldn't even be thinking about this. You know how people are, they see one of us and it's all headlines. Mafia invades elementary school. Invade? Salvatore scoffed. It's not a damn invasion, it's Friendship Day. We'd be the friendliest guys there. Laughter rippled through the room, quick but nervous. Angelo, who rarely spoke, finally said, "You ever think maybe this is exactly what people need to see? Not what they think we are, but what we really can be." Bruno rolled his eyes. "And what's that?" "Babysitters." Angelo didn't flinch. "Human." The word landed like a punch. Don Vittorio took a sip of espresso, his reflection rippling on the dark surface. "He asked for one day," he said finally. "Not protection money, not a favor, just one day." Luca leaned back in his chair. "So what's stopping us?" Don Vittorio sighed. "Everything." The group fell silent again. Outside, the sky was turning gold, the kind of sunset that makes you think too much. Don Vittorio reached into his jacket and pulled out Eli's drawing again. He smoothed it out on the bar. "Look at this," he said. "The kid thinks we're heroes." Bruno snorted. That's his first mistake. But no one laughed. Don Vittorio kept his eyes on the paper. "You know what's funny? We spend half our lives proving we're not villains, but we never try to be heroes either." Luca grinned faintly. "You trying to give a speech, Don?" "Maybe." He looked around. "We can't fix the world. Hell, we can't even fix ourselves half the time. But maybe we can fix one morning for one kid." The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then Salvatore said softly, "That's not nothing." Angelo nodded. "It's something." Bruno groaned, rubbing his face. "You guys are losing it. You really going to pull up there in a convoy?" "What? Hand out candy to kids?" Don Vittorio smirked. "Nah, maybe just some respect." That night, the social club lights stayed on longer than usual. Conversations came and went in low tones. The smell of leather and cigar smoke filled the air, mixed with the tension of a decision none of them wanted to make too quickly. Don Vittorio sat at the bar, the drawing in front of him, a cup of espresso growing cold beside it. He stared at the crooked handwriting. "The family protects its own." It wasn't perfect, but it said everything. He thought about Eli's cracked sneakers, his trembling voice, the way he'd looked back before turning the corner. That kind of hope didn't last long in the world, and Don Vittorio couldn't stand the thought of being one more adult who let it die. Bruno walked over, shaking his head. "You really think this is worth the trouble?" Don Vittorio didn't answer right away. He looked up, eyes tired but steady. "You ever been asked for something that small?" And realized it meant everything. Bruno didn't reply. He just stared back, then turned away with a grunt. The room fell quiet again. Only the soft hum of a radio filled the air. Finally, Don Vittorio stood. "I'm going tomorrow. Anyone who doesn't want to come, don't." No speech, no plan, just that. Luca smiled under his beard. "Then I guess we're all going." One by one, heads nodded. The decision had been made. Not by orders, not by pride, but by something deeper. No one talked about how the town would react or what it might cost them. None of it mattered now, because somewhere in that quiet American town, a 10-year-old boy was sitting in his room, maybe staring at a gold ring, maybe wondering if anyone would really show up. And for the first time in a long time, a group of men who thought they were done changing felt something stir. Something small, something human. It wasn't about image or reputation. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about a promise that had never been spoken but already made. A boy had asked, and somewhere deep inside they all knew the answer had already been yes. The restaurant lights were dim when Don Vittorio stepped outside that night. The air was cool, quiet, heavy, with the kind of silence that makes a man think too much. He kept seeing that small face, Eli's wide eyes, his broken arm, and that shaky smile that shouldn't have belonged to a 10-year-old. He didn't sleep. Instead, he drove. Luca and Salvatore joined him, no questions asked. The 3 black cars rolled through town, headlights low, cutting across the dark streets until they reached the poorer side. Don Vittorio didn't need directions. He just knew. They stopped in front of a worn-down apartment building. The windows flickered with old TV light, and on the porch railing hung a tiny bicycle missing a pedal. Don Vittorio killed the engine and walked up the stairs. A woman answered the door halfway. Tired eyes, scrub still on from a late shift. Yes, evening, ma'am, Don Vittorio said softly. Name's Vittorio. We met your boy today. Her eyes softened. You're the Mafia men. Yes, ma'am. She hesitated, then opened the door. I'm Jenna. Come in before the neighbors start talking. The apartment was small but spotless. 2 rooms, a hand-me-down couch, the smell of soap and coffee. On the table lay a worksheet titled Friendship Day Interview Ask Your Friend. 3 questions. The lines were empty. Eli appeared from the hallway, pajamas on, cast visible, hair still damp. When he saw them, his mouth fell open. You came, he said. Just checking in, Don Vittorio said with a smile. Jenna folded her arms. He doesn't usually get visitors, you'll have to forgive the surprise. Don Vittorio nodded. Mind if we ask what happened? Eli glanced at his mom. She nodded. He looked down at his cast. I fell off Mr. Clark's dirt bike. I wanted to show the boys I could ride, but when I fell, they didn't help. They laughed. Laughed? Luca repeated, frowning. Eli nodded. They call me Metal Boy. Tap my cast when I walk by. It's like, I don't count. Don Vittorio's throat tightened. He'd heard laughter like that before. The cruel kind. Meant to remind you where you don't belong. Mr. Alvarez, the janitor, found me. Eli continued. He used to work for people like you. He said I reminded him of himself. He came to see me in the hospital. No one else did. Don Vittorio noticed Jenna looked down, shame flickering behind exhaustion. She works 2 jobs, Eli added quickly. I know she wanted to. Jenna smiled weakly. He's always making excuses for me. Don Vittorio chuckled softly. Good son. Then serious again. And tomorrow's Friendship Day. Eli nodded. You're supposed to bring a friend. Take a picture. Write something nice. Grandma came last year, but she's sick. I didn't want to be the only one again. He looked up, eyes hopeful. I thought maybe you could come. But you don't have to. I know you're busy. That last line cracked every man in the room. Don Vittorio cleared his throat. Eli, what you asked for. That's not small. It takes guts to ask for help. Eli shrugged. Grandma says brave just means scared. But doing it anyway. Luca smiled. Smart grandma. Jenna finally spoke. Look, I know how people see you men. The suits, the reputation, the stories. They don't see what he saw, but when he came home with that ring, he stood taller. Don Vittorio nodded. Ma'am, if we come tomorrow, we'll come with respect. Quiet, careful, just to make sure he's not alone. She hesitated, then smiled. You'd really do that? We'll make sure the school and police know, Don Vittorio said. No surprises. Thank you, she whispered. He needs something good. Eli grinned wide. So you'll come? Don Vittorio met his eyes. Yeah, kid. We'll come. The boy's smile could have lit the whole room. Outside, Luca muttered, You sure about this? Don Vittorio straightened his tie. No, but we're doing it anyway. Back at the social club, a few more men were waiting. The story spread quick. The fall, the bullies, the janitor, the empty paper on the table. Angelo spoke first. We go in peace. No cigars, no loud voices. We're there for the kid, not the crowd, Bruno grumbled. People will freak out when they see us. Then let them, Luca said. Maybe they'll finally see who we really are. That shut everyone up. Don Vittorio looked at the drawing pinned on the wall. Eli's shaky crayon cars. The words "the family protects its own" scrolled at the top. He tapped it with one finger. This is what we're showing up for. They started making quiet calls. Angelo reached the police station, explaining it was for a school event. The officer on duty remembered the organization from a charity donation. Keep it calm and we'll stay back, he said. Jenna emailed the principal warning her in advance. No trouble, just kindness, she wrote. By midnight it was set. No show, no headlines, just presence. Before turning in, Don Vittorio stood in the empty social club and stared at the drawing one more time. The family protects its own, he murmured. For a man who had spent his life leading men through the underworld, this was the first time that line meant something real. He turned off the light, walked outside and breathed in the cold night air. The black Cadillacs gleamed faintly under the moon, a line of chrome and shadow waiting for dawn. Somewhere across town, a boy was falling asleep with a gold ring under his pillow and a little hope finally stitched back together. And for the first time in years, Don Vittorio felt like the road ahead might actually lead somewhere worth going. The morning came gray and cold, the kind of morning that made you want to stay under a warm blanket and forget the world existed. But at the social club, the lights were already on, and the smell of espresso and leather filled the air. Don Vittorio stood at the long wooden table in the center of the room. A map of the town spread out in front of him. Around him, the men were gathering one by one, dress shoes clicking, cups clinking, car engines idling outside. Nobody was joking this time. The laughter that usually came with morning espresso had been replaced by something heavier. Purpose. Bruno walked in first, adjusting his tie. "You really going to do this, Don?" Don Vittorio didn't look up. "We said we would." Luca came next, a toothpick hanging from his mouth. "We talked to the school. Principal's nervous but said as long as we behave, she won't call the cops," Salvatore added. "Police know too. They'll be watching from across the street just in case." Bruno snorted. "Just in case we start a turf war at an elementary school. Just in case someone panics," Don Vittorio said. "Can't blame them. We're not exactly the poster boys for quiet mornings." He folded his arms and looked around the room. "This isn't about us, it's about a kid who asked for something simple, for someone to stand next to him." Luca nodded. "Then we stand." Don Vittorio smiled faintly. "We stand." The plan wasn't complicated. It never is when the heart's in the right place. They'd meet at the restaurant at 7 a.m. Drive slow. No loud engines, no show, no noise. Just presence. They'd park on the edge of the schoolyard. Line up clean. No sunglasses indoors. Hands visible. "I don't want one wrong look," Don Vittorio warned. "Not one cigar, not one word that makes a teacher nervous," Bruno grumbled. "So basically, you want us to act like altar boys?" Don Vittorio's eyes narrowed. "Just for a day." That made the room chuckle low and short, but it broke the tension. They started preparing. Suits pressed clean, cars washed until the black paint looked like mirrors. Some of the men brought small gifts, school supplies, candy, a new backpack Luca had picked up that morning. None of them said it out loud, but they all knew what this meant. For men used to being feared, they were about to do something that required more courage than any confrontation or deal gone bad. They were about to be seen differently. By 6:30, the social club buzzed like a beehive. Angelo adjusted his cufflinks. Salvatore filled a thermos for Don Vittorio. Bruno muttered to himself about public relations nightmares, but even he looked sharper than usual. Luca walked up beside Don Vittorio, looking out the window where dawn was breaking faintly behind the mountains. "You sure about 72 cars, Don?" Don Vittorio rubbed his chin. "We won't all pull up. Half stay down the road, enough to make a statement, not a siege." Luca nodded. "Smart." Salvatore checked his watch. "You think the boy's ready?" Don Vittorio smiled. "I think he's been ready his whole life. He just needed someone to show up." They rolled out just before sunrise. The engines purred, not roared. The air carried a chill that bit the fingertips, but woke you up better than coffee ever could. The convoy of black Cadillacs, Lincolns, and Mercedes stretched for blocks, sleek and silent, weaving like a dark river through the waking town. People came out of porches and driveways, eyes wide, some waving, some staring. A few pulled out phones. The sight of so many luxury cars in formation wasn't something you saw every day, especially not this quietly, this purposefully. Don Vittorio led the convoy, Luca in the car beside him, Salvatore behind. Bruno grumbled from further back, but never slowed down. By the time they reached the restaurant parking lot, the place looked like a movie scene. Sunlight breaking through thin clouds, steam rising off espresso cups, the smell of fresh bread and exhaust mixing in the air. Don Vittorio parked first, straightened his tie, and called the group together. "All right, listen up," he said. "This isn't about intimidation or making a show. You keep your cool. You nod if someone looks at you, and you remember who this is for. One boy, one morning. That's it." Salvatore raised his thermos. "To the kid." The group echoed softly. "To the kid." They got back in their cars, engines low and steady, and headed toward the school. The road curved gently through the center of town, past the grocery store, past the gas station, past the little barber shop where old men were already reading newspapers. As they drove, more people looked up. Some smiled, others whispered, but for once, nobody pointed with fear. At the front, Don Vittorio's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. He wasn't thinking about reputation or judgment, or what people might post online later. He was thinking about a small boy tying his shoes that morning, wondering if anyone would come. When they reached the school's main street, Don Vittorio slowed the convoy down even more. The first students were already outside, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughter spilling through the crisp morning air. Some noticed the cars first. "What the?" one kid whispered, elbowing his friend. "Is that the Mafia?" Within seconds, phones were out, eyes wide, mouths open. Teachers stepped out of the doors, squinting into the sun. A security guard walked forward, radio in hand, hesitating when he saw the police car already idling by the curb. The officer behind the wheel, a local named Reed, stepped out, smiled slightly, and gave a small nod to Don Vittorio, the kind that said, "We talked. You're clear." Don Vittorio nodded back. He motioned with one hand, and the cars began to line up across the curb in perfect formation. Engines idled, then shut off one by one until all that remained was silence and the soft clicking of cooling metal. And then down the walkway a small figure appeared. Eli. He wore his best clothes, a plaid shirt buttoned wrong at the top, jeans that were just a little too short, and his cast freshly decorated with new drawings. In his good hand, he held the little gold ring Don Vittorio had given him. His eyes widened when he saw them. The boy froze for a second, unable to move. Don Vittorio stepped out of his car, buttoned his jacket and waved him over. "Morning, kid." Eli started walking, then jogging, then running. He reached Don Vittorio and stopped, breathless, looking up. "You really came." Don Vittorio smiled. "Told you we would." The boy's eyes darted from one side to the other. Rows of black cars, dark suits, weathered faces softened by smiles. Bruno bent down. "You the reason I had to get my shoes shined this morning?" Eli giggled. "They still have a scuff." Laughter broke through the line. Warm, real, human. Don Vittorio knelt beside him. "Ready for school?" Eli nodded, gripping the ring tighter. "Yeah, I think so." "Good," Don Vittorio said. "Then let's walk you in." The teachers didn't know what to do. Some froze, some whispered. The principal stood on the steps, hands clasped, trying to process what she was seeing. A boy with a broken arm walking toward the doors, flanked by a wall of men in expensive suits. And yet, no one looked scared anymore because something in the air had changed. There was no chaos, no threat, just presence. The engines quiet, the sunlight glinting off polished chrome, and in the middle of it all, a 10-year-old kid walking taller than he ever had before. The moment didn't need words. It was a kind of peace you could feel. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand. It simply shows up. The men stood by as Eli reached the school doors. He turned back to Don Vittorio and said softly, "You can come inside too, right?" Don Vittorio looked toward the principal, who hesitated, then smiled faintly and nodded. "Yes, he can." Don Vittorio placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then lead the way, partner." And as they walked into that school together, the world outside grew quiet enough for everyone watching to feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. Not the kind you demand. The kind you earn by simply keeping your word. The town heard them before it saw them. Not the deafening roar people expected from a mob convoy. This sound was deeper, slower, more respectful. A low purr that carried through the cold morning air, steady as a heartbeat. Shop doors opened. A mail carrier froze beside his truck. Parents waiting in driveways turned to look as 70 black luxury cars rolled through the small streets of the quiet American town. They weren't there to make noise. They were there to keep a promise. At the front of the convoy drove Don Vittorio, his eyes steady, his jaw calm. Luca and Salvatore flanked him in their own cars, and the rest followed like a wave of steel and polish. They didn't rev the engines or honk. They drove in silence, the sunlight bouncing off waxed paint like a slow-moving sunrise. When they turned onto the school street, the chatter of kids and the sounds of mourning fell away. One by one, the cars eased to the curb. Engines clicked off. the air filled with the soft tick of cooling metal. And then quiet. Every head turned. Teachers peered through the windows. Parents clutched coffee cups. Kids stopped mid-laugh, their mouths open, unsure what they were seeing. And then the doors of the school opened and Eli appeared. His hair was neatly combed, shirt tucked in, cast newly drawn on with stars and words of encouragement. He carried the little gold ring in his good hand. His eyes went wide when he saw them lined up across the yard like sentinels in dark suits. He froze for a moment, then whispered, barely audible, "They came." Don Vittorio straightened his tie and smiled. "Morning, partner." Eli walked toward him slowly, then faster, then broke into a run. He stopped right in front of Don Vittorio, his face glowing with disbelief. "You really came?" he said, almost out of breath. "Told you we would," Don Vittorio said. Behind them, the men stood straight, hands clasped respectfully in front of them, jackets buttoned. There were no cigars, no smirks, no jokes, just quiet respect. Bruno, the biggest of them all, grunted. "You're the reason I had to polish my cufflinks this morning, kid." Eli giggled, one still crooked. A low, warm laugh rolled through the line, the kind that didn't need to be loud to fill the air. The principal stepped outside, nervous but curious. The police officer on duty, Officer Reed, gave Don Vittorio a nod of understanding. Everything was in order. No trouble, no surprise, just presence. Don Vittorio knelt, so he was eye level with Eli. "You ready for your big day?" Eli nodded, smiling so wide it almost cracked his face. "Good," Don Vittorio said. "Let's walk you in." They moved together, Don Vittorio on one side, Luca and Salvatore a few steps behind. The men didn't form a wall around him. They formed a path, one that said, "You belong here." Teachers stepped aside. Kids whispered, but no one laughed. The bullies who once called him names just stared, small in the shadow of something bigger than them. Not fear, but dignity. Eli's footsteps sounded louder than usual on the pavement, steady and sure. The ring he carried caught the light with every step, and for once that broken arm didn't look like something to hide. Inside the doorway, the principal found her voice. "Good morning, Eli." "Good morning, ma'am," he answered. She looked at Don Vittorio. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting him have this," Don Vittorio replied. In the hallway, the air smelled like pencils and floor wax. A banner hung from the ceiling. "Friendship Day. Celebrate kindness." Don Vittorio paused at the classroom door. "You want us to come in?" he asked. Eli thought for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I want them to see." The class fell silent when they entered. Some kids leaned back in their seats, others just watched. His teacher, Mrs. Carter, blinked in surprise but managed a soft smile. "Well, class," she said, "this is Eli and his friend." Don Vittorio nodded once. "Morning, morning," came a few murmurs back. Eli took his seat, shoulders square, chin up. The boy who once hid behind his cast now looked like he'd found his own armor. On his desk was a worksheet titled, "My Friend and Me." He picked up a pencil and wrote carefully what I admire. "He keeps his word, what he taught me." "Ask anyway." Mrs. Carter watched in silence, her smile trembling. In the back, Don Vittorio leaned against the wall, hands clasped in front of him. He'd led men through difficult situations, negotiations, and funerals, but never something like this. Somehow standing in a fourth-grade classroom beside a kid who just found his voice felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. Outside, a few men who stayed with the cars talked quietly to curious kids and parents. "Are those real mobsters?" one boy asked. "Only if you don't do your homework," Bruno said, straight-faced. Laughter broke the tension. A teacher whispered to another, "They're actually polite." "Yeah," her friend answered. "Maybe we judge too fast." Don Vittorio turned toward the hallway where the janitor, Mr. Alvarez, had stopped his cart mid-roll. Their eyes met, and the older man smiled knowingly. He gave Eli a small salute. The boy saluted back. Two men who understood the same world, decades apart, connected by something unspoken. When Friendship Day's morning circle began, each kid shared who they brought, a sibling, a grandparent, a friend. Then came Eli's turn. He stood cast across his chest and said simply, "My friend is Don Vittorio. He listens. He showed up." No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence in that room was louder than applause. Don Vittorio felt something tightened behind his ribs. Not pride, not ego, but a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. When it was time to go, the men waited by the doors. Don Vittorio leaned down to Eli. "We'll stop by Fridays, help you with that bike chain." Eli grinned. "You promise?" Don Vittorio smiled. "You already know the answer to that." As they stepped outside, the sunlight hit the row of black cars like a stage light. The engines came alive again, but softer this time. A heartbeat instead of thunder. Eli stood on the steps and waved, the wind blowing his hair across his forehead. Every man lifted a hand in return. The convoy rolled away slow and smooth down the main road, and the people who watched didn't see criminals that morning. They saw men who had kept a promise to a boy who believed they would. For a few long seconds after the cars left, the schoolyard stayed frozen. Nobody knew whether to cheer, talk, or even breathe. The sound of the engines faded down the street, leaving behind a kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full. Inside, the students buzzed with energy. Every hallway echoed with whispers. "Did you see them? Were those really Mafia men?" They came for Eli. Some teachers tried to steer the excitement back toward math and reading, but the day had already changed shape. No one could go back to normal after watching 70 men in suits show up just to keep one boy company. Eli sat at his desk, still holding the pencil he'd used to write. He keeps his word. His cheeks hurt from smiling. For the first time, the air around him didn't feel heavy. He wasn't invisible anymore. But change, even the good kind, makes people nervous. And nervous people often react in ways they later regret. At recess, Eli walked out to the playground, cast and all. The sunlight hit the metal slides and laughter filled the yard. He was halfway across the blacktop when he heard a voice behind him. "Well, look who thinks he's famous." He turned. Dylan, the same boy who had once called him Metal Boy, stood with two friends. They weren't laughing this time. They just looked uneasy, like they didn't know how to handle what they'd seen that morning. Eli's stomach tightened, but he stood still. "Bet you think you're special now, huh?" Dylan said, kicking at the dirt. "Bringing gangsters to school, trying to scare people." "I didn't bring them," Eli said quietly. "They came." The tone of his voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even defensive. It was calm. And that calm unnerved Dylan more than yelling ever could. One of Dylan's friends muttered, "Man, my dad said they're dangerous." "They're not," Eli replied. "They're my friends." That made Dylan laugh short and sharp. "Friends? You don't even know them." Eli looked him in the eye. "I didn't know you either. But you still laughed when I fell." For a moment, Dylan had no answer. His face went red. "Whatever," he muttered and turned away. His friends followed, but slower than before. Something in the way Eli had said it, not angry, not small, made them rethink their steps. Mrs. Carter, watching from the steps, saw the exchange. She didn't step in. She didn't need to. Some lessons don't need teachers. They just need witnesses. That afternoon, when the final bell rang, the school felt different. The kids left in groups chattering about black cars and men in suits. Eli walked home alone, but it didn't feel lonely. He was halfway down the block when a car slowed beside him. It was a white sedan. The principal, Mrs. Greer, she rolled down her window. "Eli, you doing all right?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I wanted to thank you again for this morning," she said, "and to apologize if we've overlooked things." Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You told your teacher about the bullying before, didn't you?" Eli nodded slowly. "A few times." She looked away for a second, ashamed. It shouldn't have taken this for us to listen. He didn't know what to say, so he just shrugged. "It's okay." "No," she said. "It's not. But maybe we'll fix it now." When she drove off, Eli kept walking, thinking about how sometimes grown-ups say sorry, without saying the word. That evening, Don Vittorio stopped by the restaurant where everything had started. The place buzzed with conversation. Customers who had seen the news, locals replaying the moment over espresso. Someone had already posted a picture online. Mafia boss escorts boy to Friendship Day. It was spreading fast. When Don Vittorio walked in, the owner grinned. "You started something, you know that?" He smiled back. "Hopefully something good. Everyone in town's talking about it. Even the sheriff stopped by. Said it was the quietest school morning he's ever seen. Don Vittorio nodded. Quiet's a nice change. As he left the restaurant, he saw a small figure sitting on the curb outside. Eli. Hey, partner, Don Vittorio said, sitting down beside him. Didn't expect to see you here. Eli smiled. Mom's still at work. I came to draw. He held up a sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of the morning's convoy, dozens of black cars, the school in the background, and a small figure in a cast standing at the front. Don Vittorio whistled. You've got talent, kid. Eli shrugged, proud but shy. It's easier to draw things I remember. Good memory to keep, Don Vittorio said. How'd the rest of the day go? Eli hesitated. Okay, some kids were weird about it, but it's fine. Don Vittorio studied his face. Weird how? They just don't know what to think yet, Eli said. Maybe they will. Don Vittorio smiled. You sound older than me sometimes. I don't think so, Eli replied. You just sound tired. That made Don Vittorio laugh. A deep, honest laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. You might be right about that. As they sat there, Luca pulled up in his car, window down. You two planning to solve the world's problems out here? Just talking, Don Vittorio said. Town's already buzzing, Luca said. Local reporter called, wants to do a story. Eli's eyes widened. A story? Don't worry, Don Vittorio said. We'll make sure they focus on what matters. That night, the story went online. Headline: Mafia boss teaches small town a lesson in friendship. The article didn't focus on suits or reputation or stereotypes. It talked about a boy who stood alone until 70 strangers decided he shouldn't. It quoted the principle. They taught us what showing up really means. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond their town. Radio stations called. News crews wanted interviews. Don Vittorio ignored most of them, but he couldn't stop the ripple that had already begun. At the social club, the men gathered around the TV, watching clips from local news. The anchor spoke with a smile. One small act of friendship turned into a moment the whole country's talking about. Bruno chuckled. We're famous for something good for once. Don Vittorio leaned back in his chair. Don't get used to it. Luca looked at him. You think this will change anything? Don Vittorio thought about that for a long time. Maybe not the world, he said. But maybe it'll change how one kid walks into school tomorrow. That's enough. Later that afternoon, Don Vittorio's phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a woman's voice said, Mr. Vittorio, this is Jenna, Eli's mom. Her voice was warm but shaky. I just wanted to thank you again. I got home and he was already drawing pictures of the cars. I haven't seen him smile like that since before his dad left. Don Vittorio's throat tightened. He's a good kid. We didn't do much. He did. You did plenty, Jenna said softly. You showed him that good men still keep promises. Don Vittorio didn't have an answer for that. He just said, tell him to keep drawing. When the call ended, he sat there for a while, the phone still in his hand. He didn't feel proud. He felt human, like something old and hard in him had finally started to soften. Across town, Dylan sat at his kitchen table watching the same news story. His mom said, That's sweet, isn't it? He muttered. Yeah. Without looking away, the clip showed Eli smiling, surrounded by men in suits. Something inside him shifted. Guilt, envy, maybe both. He closed the laptop and stared out the window. Tomorrow. He thought maybe he'd try talking instead of laughing. And maybe that was the real power of what happened that day. Not the convoy, not the headlines, but the quiet after. Because in that quiet, people started to listen. The next morning, the town felt lighter. People smiled more at stoplights. Strangers held doors open a little longer. It was as if one act of decency had cracked something open inside everyone. But at the school, something else was about to surface. Something that had been buried under months of silence. When Eli walked into class, a small crowd gathered around his desk. Kids who once ignored him now wanted to talk. A girl asked, "Was that your dad?" He laughed and said, "No, just my friends." Even the teachers looked different, not distant or rushed, but softer, more aware. The principal walked the halls herself that morning, greeting students, thanking staff. Change doesn't always need big speeches. Sometimes it starts with people simply paying attention. After recess, Mrs. Carter asked Eli to stay a moment. "I have something for you," she said. She handed him a thin folder with his name written on it in blue marker. Inside were copies of reports, ones she had filed months earlier about the bullying, notes from the nurse written after Eli's fall, emails between staff members, and one document dated 2 days before the accident that made her voice catch when she spoke. "I didn't see this until last night," she said. The janitor, Mr. Alvarez, had filed an incident report. He wrote that he saw Dylan and the other boys messing with that old dirt bike the morning you got hurt. He said they dared you to ride it. Eli's eyes widened. "They did, but I told them it was my idea." Mrs. Carter shook her head gently. "You were protecting them." Eli stared at the paper. "I just didn't want more trouble. You didn't cause it," she said. "You deserve people to know the truth." By lunchtime, the principal had the same folder open on her desk. The truth was simple. The bullies hadn't just laughed when Eli fell, they'd set him up. What followed was months of ignoring his complaints, hoping the problem would fade. Now, with the entire town watching, they couldn't hide anymore. Mrs. Greer, the principal, looked out her office window at the playground below. "We should have listened," she whispered. The next day, a school meeting was called. Teachers, students, and parents gathered in the gym. The local news crew was there too, cameras rolling. Don Vittorio and a few of the men stood quietly in the back. Not to gloat, not to intimidate, just to support. Eli sat on the first row, legs swinging nervously. His mom sat beside him, hands clasped. The principal walked up to the microphone. "This past week reminded us what friendship truly means," she began. "It also reminded us that silence can be just as cruel as words." She held up the report folder. "We learned that one of our students, Eli, was injured not because of an accident but because of a dare, because some students thought hurting someone would make them stronger." A hush fell over the room. The boys in question sat a few rows back, their parents beside them. Dylan's face was pale. His mom covered her mouth. Mrs. Greer continued, "We ignored warning signs. We failed to protect him. But today we take responsibility and we thank those who reminded us what courage looks like." Her eyes flicked to the back of the room toward the men in dark suits standing silently against the wall. Don Vittorio gave a small nod. Eli felt his heartbeat thumping in his ears. He didn't like the spotlight, but he didn't hide either. He just sat still like someone who'd finally stopped running. After the meeting, kids crowded around him again. This time, not out of curiosity but respect. Some mumbled apologies, some offered smiles. And then Dylan came forward. He didn't bring his friends. He didn't have the swagger anymore, just quiet steps across the gym floor. Eli tensed, unsure what would happen. Dylan stopped in front of him. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," Eli replied. Dylan looked at the ground. "They said I should say sorry." He hesitated. "But I don't want to just say it. I want to do something." Eli frowned. "Like what?" "I asked the principal if I could help fix the old bike you fell from," Dylan said. "Maybe we can paint it, make it yours again." Eli blinked. "You'd do that?" "Yeah," Dylan said. "I was a jerk. You didn't deserve that." Eli looked down at his cast. The word brave stared back at him in thick marker lines. "Okay," he said. "We can fix it." Dylan smiled a little. It wasn't relief. It was gratitude. At the back of the gym, Don Vittorio had watched the whole thing unfold. Luca whispered, "You see that?" Don Vittorio nodded. "Yeah." Luca grinned. "Guess the kid just started his own family." Later that afternoon, the news clip aired on TV. It showed Eli and Dylan shaking hands with the reporter's voice narrating, "Criminals turned protectors." And a small boy's courage changed an entire school. Don Vittorio didn't watch it live. He was outside the social club polishing his car when his phone buzzed. It was Jenna. "Did you see it?" she asked, her voice bright with pride. "Not yet," he said. "Well, they used your full name on the news," she said. The reporter said Vittorio Moretti, known locally as Don Vittorio, led the convoy that turned Friendship Day into a movement. Don Vittorio chuckled. "That's a fancy way to say I just showed up." "You did more than that," she said softly. "You gave my boy his voice back." When the call ended, Don Vittorio sat there in the evening quiet, the light fading across the asphalt. He thought about how strange it was, how one broken arm could fix so much more than it broke. At that same moment, miles away, Eli sat at his kitchen table with a marker in his hand, decorating the last corner of his cast. Across the top, he wrote 4 new words in big letters. Never walk alone again. His mom smiled. That's a good one. Don Vittorio said it once, he replied, not with words, but when he showed up. A knock came at the door. Eli jumped up and ran to answer. Outside stood Dylan, holding the dirt bike, freshly cleaned, its frame repainted bright black with gold trim. I told you I'd fix it, Dylan said. Eli stepped out onto the porch, grinning. Looks new, it's yours now, Dylan said. My dad helped me with the paint job. For a long second, neither boy spoke. Then Eli reached out his good arm. Dylan shook it. No cameras, no teachers, no applause. Just 2 kids standing in the golden light of an ordinary afternoon, quietly rewriting what friendship meant to both of them. From his parked car down the street, Don Vittorio watched through the windshield unseen. He didn't step out. He didn't need to. Luca, sitting beside him, smiled. You think they'll make it stick? Don Vittorio exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said. Because it started with truth and that never fades. The 2 men sat there watching the boys laugh, the black and gold bike glinting in the light. The world around them hadn't changed much. Business still needed handling. Territory still needed watching. But something small, something good had taken root. Maybe that's all change ever really needs. One brave kid, one honest apology, and a few people willing to listen when the engines go quiet. And in that moment, as the sun dipped low over the small town, Don Vittorio realized something he hadn't in years. Redemption doesn't always come roaring in with a convoy. Sometimes it arrives softly in forgiveness, in truth, in the echo of a promise kept. By the end of the week, the town was still talking. But now it wasn't gossip. It was gratitude. What started as a quiet morning convoy had turned into something bigger. People were donating bikes to the school. Parents were volunteering to supervise recess. A local mechanic even set up a Fix-It Friday for kids who wanted to learn how to repair old bicycles and small engines. And at the center of it all was Eli, the boy who had once stood alone behind a restaurant, asking strangers to be his friends. The news stations came back that weekend, their cameras catching the newly painted dirt bike leaning proudly against the school fence. A reporter asked, "How does it feel to be famous?" Eli grinned. "I'm not famous, I just got lucky with my friends." Behind him, Don Vittorio and Luca stood in the background, quietly proud, refusing interviews. The attention didn't matter. The kid did. Back at the social club, Bruno flipped through a newspaper and laughed. Would you look at that headline? Mafia boss teaches town a lesson in humanity. Never thought I'd see those words together. Salvatore grinned. Guess we're turning soft. Luca shook his head. Nah, we just remembered we got hearts under all these suits. Don Vittorio sat at the bar, sipping his espresso, watching them with a faint smile. He didn't say much, but everyone could tell something in him had shifted too. He looked lighter, like a man who'd finally found peace with a past that had followed him too long. A few days later, Don Vittorio got a call from the police station. Officer Reed wanted to meet for coffee. They sat at a diner booth by the window. 2 men from different worlds, but not so different anymore. Never thought I'd say this, Reed began. But you did a good thing, Vittorio. That boy, he changed how people see you and your organization. Don Vittorio shrugged. We just showed up. Reed leaned back. That's exactly it. Most people don't. Not when it matters. There was a pause. Then Don Vittorio said quietly, You ever notice how people talk about bad men more than good ones? Reed nodded. Because good ones don't make noise. Don Vittorio chuckled. Guess we made some noise anyway. When he got back to the social club, he found a thick envelope on the bar. It was from the principal. Inside were thank you letters, all handwritten by the students. Crayon drawings of black cars and smiles filled the pages. One said, Thank you for being kind even though you look scary. Another read, You made my friend happy again. The last one stopped Don Vittorio cold. You didn't just help Eli, you helped us all remember what brave looks like. Don Vittorio folded that one carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. That same night, Jenna stopped by the social club with Eli. The boy carried a small box wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Don Vittorio asked. Eli held it out shilly. "A present for all of you." Inside was a framed drawing, the same one he'd been working on since the convoy. It showed 70 black cars, a school, and the words "The family protects its own" in bold letters across the sky. The men gathered around, speechless. Luca cleared his throat. "You got real talent, kid." Eli smiled. "Maybe one day I'll paint real ones." "You will," Don Vittorio said. Jenna stepped forward. "We can't thank you enough. You changed how people see this town, how they see you." Don Vittorio shook his head. "We didn't change. We just remembered who we were supposed to be." Later that night, when everyone else had gone home, Don Vittorio stayed behind alone. The drawing hung on the wall above the bar now, the last light flickering against its colors. He thought about how it all started. A boy with a broken arm, too shy to look up, asking the simplest thing anyone can ask. "Can you be my friend for one day?" He'd said yes, because it felt like the right thing to do. But somehow, that one yes had rippled farther than any of them imagined. It wasn't just about cars or bullies or headlines. It was about what happens when people decide to care, when they choose presence over excuses. The next morning, the town mayor invited the organization to a community event downtown. "We're honoring people who made a difference this year," she said. "You're on that list." Don Vittorio hesitated. "We don't do speeches." "Then don't," she said with a smile. "Just show up like you always do." So they did. On a clear Saturday morning, the men drove into the town square in their black Cadillacs, slow, respectful, their engines purring like low thunder. Crowds lined the sidewalks, clapping, waving. For once, nobody crossed the street to avoid them. The mayor stepped up to the microphone. "Sometimes," she said, "the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Today, we honor a group of men who reminded us what loyalty, courage, and friendship really mean." Applause filled the air. Kids climbed on their parents' shoulders to see better. Eli sat in the front row, his cast finally gone, waving both hands high. Don Vittorio walked up to the stage, adjusting his tie with a humble smile. "You don't have to do all this," he said. The mayor grinned. "We already did." Don Vittorio turned to the crowd. "We're not saints," he said. "We're just people who saw someone who needed help and decided not to drive past." That line landed deeper than any fancy speech could. When the ceremony ended, the men didn't hang around for the cameras. They had coffee with the crowd, shook hands, then quietly rolled out of town the way they'd come in, leaving behind the same steady presence that had changed everything. Later that evening, Don Vittorio drove alone for a while. The highway stretched wide, the sky deep orange. He thought about Eli, about his smile, about how something so small had turned into something that would outlive them all. As he pulled over to rest, his phone buzzed with a photo message. It was from Jenna. It showed Eli at home holding the rebuilt dirt bike. The caption said, "First ride tomorrow." Don Vittorio smiled to himself. He could almost hear the kid laughing in the wind. He tucked his phone away, leaned back against his car, and watched the sun slip below the hills. For once, the world didn't feel heavy. Maybe redemption didn't need noise or grand gestures. Maybe it was just about keeping your word and meaning it. And in a quiet American town that had learned something about loyalty, everyone from kids to parents to businessmen knew one thing for sure. If you show up for someone once, they'll remember it forever. Weeks passed. The town slowly settled back into its rhythm. School bells, grocery runs, evening walks, kids riding their bikes through the fading gold of late afternoon. But beneath that familiar routine, something new remained. Quiet but strong, a sense of connection that hadn't been there before. Eli's cast finally came off. His arm was thin, a little stiff, but healed. On the day the doctor removed it, he asked if he could keep it. When the nurse laughed and said, "Most kids don't want a souvenir," he smiled. "It's not about the cast," he said. "It's about what it means." Back home, he placed it on a shelf next to his drawing, the one that read, "The family protects its own." To him, it wasn't just a memory. It was proof that even a small voice could reach people no one expected to listen. Every Friday after school, 2 or 3 men would stop by the playground. Never loud, never in full suits, Just casual visits in nice slacks and dress shirts. They helped fix flat tires, handed out ice cream bars, and sometimes just sat on the curb with kids who didn't have anyone waiting for them. The teachers stopped calling them those men and started calling them the guys from the Friday crew. One afternoon, Eli showed up early to meet them. Don Vittorio was already there working on an old mini bike someone had donated. He was trying to get the chain to stay in place, his sleeves rolled up, muttering under his breath. "Need help?" Eli asked, smiling. Don Vittorio looked up. "You volunteering, partner?" Eli nodded, pulling out a small toolkit from his backpack, one that Luca had given him. They worked side by side for an hour, the sound of metal clicking and the soft hum of distant traffic mixing into a comfortable silence. When they finished, Don Vittorio turned the key. The small engine sputtered, then came to life. Eli's face lit up like sunrise. Don Vittorio grinned. "Looks like you've got yourself a ride." Eli laughed. "I can't believe it works." Don Vittorio stood back, arms crossed. "Told you if something's worth fixing, you don't quit halfway." Later, the boy rode slow circles around the empty lot, his hair whipping in the wind, his laughter carrying across the air. It wasn't about speed or show. It was about freedom. The kind that comes when someone believes in you long enough for you to believe in yourself. From the bench, Luca said quietly, "Kid rides like he was born to." Bruno nodded. "Looks like he's one of us now." Don Vittorio smiled. He always was. That Friday, the school held a small assembly to thank the community for their support. The principal spoke briefly about kindness, about how one act had reminded everyone that empathy is contagious. Then she looked toward Eli. "This young man taught us something," she said. "That friendship isn't about who looks tough or who fits in. It's about who shows up." The audience applauded, but Eli didn't stand or bow. He just looked over his shoulder toward the back of the gym where Don Vittorio and the men stood quietly watching. Afterward, when everyone was leaving, Don Vittorio found himself surrounded by students wanting to shake hands or ask questions about the cars. One girl said, "My dad said Mafia men are bad guys, but you're not bad." Don Vittorio smiled. "Your dad's half right. We used to be bad at listening, but we're working on it." The girl giggled and ran off. That night, Don Vittorio stopped by Jenna's house to drop off some bike parts Eli had ordered. When she opened the door, the smell of dinner filled the air, something home-cooked and warm. "Come in," she said. "You can stay for a meal." He hesitated, then stepped inside. It was simple. Wooden chairs, a checkered tablecloth, family photos on the wall. Nothing fancy, but everything that mattered. Eli ran in from the living room. "Don Vittorio, you have to see this." He held up his latest drawing, the mini bike, the school, and himself wearing a small suit jacket that said, "Little Soldier" across the back. Don Vittorio laughed. "That's new. Bruno came up with it," Eli said proudly. "He said I earned it." "Well," Don Vittorio said, "I'd say he's right." They sat down for dinner talking about small things. How the school was quieter now. How Dylan had joined the Fix It Fridays. How Eli wanted to design car logos when he grew up. It was the kind of talk that didn't need meaning to matter. When dinner was done, Eli walked Don Vittorio to the porch. The evening air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. "Do you think people can change?" Eli asked suddenly. Don Vittorio thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Yeah," he said finally, "but not all at once. It's like learning to drive. You make mistakes, you adjust, you try again. Change doesn't happen fast, it just happens honest." Eli nodded, thinking it over. "Then I guess we all changed a little." Don Vittorio smiled. "You started it, partner." As he walked back to his car, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows down the road. Don Vittorio glanced over his shoulder. Eli was still standing there waving. He lifted a hand in return before the night swallowed the sound of his engine. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at the social club. Thick paper, gold seal. It was from the Department of Education. Inside was a simple note. In recognition of outstanding service to community and youth engagement, the Moretti Family Organization is hereby commended for their contribution to moral education. Bruno stared at the letter for a full minute before speaking. "We just got thanked by the government." Luca grinned. "Guess hell froze over." Don Vittorio laughed quietly. "Guess we're doing something right." They framed the letter and hung it next to Eli's drawing. 2 reminders, one from a child, one from the world, that even rough hands can do gentle work. As the months rolled by, the family protects its own projects spread to nearby towns. Other organizations picked it up, visiting schools, mentoring kids, fixing playgrounds. Nobody planned it. It just grew like good things often do. And in the middle of it all, one boy kept showing up, riding his small black and gold bike, smiling, waving at the men who had once been strangers. Sometimes at night, Don Vittorio would stop by the old restaurant, the same place where the story began. The neon lights flickered softly and the espresso tasted the same as it always had. But the quiet inside him was different now. He'd watch the road through the window, long, endless, open, and think about how it all started with 7 simple words. Can you be my friend for one day? He whispered them again, not out of sadness but gratitude, because that question had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing: purpose. And in a world that often moved too fast, maybe that was the rarest gift of all, to be asked for kindness, and to discover that answering it could change your own life too. Months later, the seasons turned. Summer's heat gave way to cool air and long shadows. The trees lining the town streets began to rust with gold and amber, and the wind carried that crisp sound only autumn can make. Dry leaves skimming across asphalt. Life had settled into something quiet and meaningful. Eli was taller now. The scar on his arm had faded into a soft line that caught the light when he waved. The dirt bike sat out front of his house, cleaner than anything else in the yard, waiting for another ride. Every now and then, people still stopped to talk about that morning. They'd mentioned the sound of 70 engines, the silence that followed, and how it felt like the whole town had inhaled hope and never fully exhaled it. But to Don Vittorio, it wasn't about the morning anymore. It was about what came after. The small changes nobody posted online, the quiet gestures no one recorded, the way people had started noticing each other again. On Fridays, the family protects its own crew still visited the school. Sometimes it was just 3 of them, sometimes 10. They'd fix a flat tire, repaint a playground bench, share lunch with the kids. No press, no cameras, just men doing what they promised. One chilly afternoon, Don Vittorio sat on the playground bench, watching Eli help a younger boy learn to ride. The little kid fell twice, and Eli picked him up each time, brushing off his knees. "Try again," Eli said, smiling. "You'll get it." Don Vittorio leaned back, feeling the weight of that moment, how the lesson had gone full circle. The boy who once needed help was now the one giving it. Bruno came up behind him, holding 2 cups of espresso. "You're quiet today." Don Vittorio took one, nodded toward the kids, just watching the legacy continue. Bruno grunted. "You think they'll remember us?" Don Vittorio smiled faintly. "Not us. No, but they'll remember how it felt. That's better." They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need words. A light breeze moved through the yard and a small piece of paper fluttered by Don Vittorio's shoe. He picked it up. It was one of the kids' drawings, stick figures in suits, a crooked sun overhead. The words, "Good people protect too," scrolled in crayon. He smiled. Guess we made the yearbook after all. That evening, the group drove out of town together one more time. Not for business, not for show, just a drive for the sake of it. The sky was painted orange and blue, the air cold enough to sting. They didn't talk much over the engines. They didn't have to. Don Vittorio led the convoy down the familiar highway, headlights stretching ahead like a trail of stars. The wind tore at his jacket, but he didn't feel the chill, only the warmth of knowing where he'd been and why it had mattered. When they reached the overlook outside town, the group pulled over. The view stretched for miles, a patchwork of fields, lights twinkling in the distance, the world wide open. Luca broke the silence. "You ever think how it all started with one kid?" Don Vittorio nodded slowly. "Yeah, one kid, one question." Bruno lit a cigar but didn't smoke it. He just held it between his fingers, watching the horizon. Can't believe how something so small turned everything upside down. Don Vittorio chuckled. Not upside down. Maybe just the right way up. They stayed there until the sky turned indigo. Nobody wanted to leave first. Finally, Don Vittorio said, "All right, boys. Time to go home." They drove back in a slow line, their taillights glowing red in the dark. Not symbols of danger this time, but of guidance like tiny beacons leading the way home. Meanwhile, across town, Eli sat at his bedroom window, listening to the faint sound of engines fading in the distance. His sketchbook lay open on his lap. On the newest page, he had drawn himself on his mini-bike, riding beside Don Vittorio's Cadillac. At the bottom, he had written a sentence that felt like a prayer even though it wasn't one. They showed up, so I will too. He looked out at the sky, wide, quiet, endless, and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, his mother found the drawing taped to the fridge. She smiled, touched it gently, and whispered back, "They'll always show up." Weeks later, before winter set in, the school hosted a small event. They renamed the annual Friendship Day. Now it was called Respect Day. The banner stretched across the gym read, "One day can change everything." The men didn't attend that year. They didn't need to. The kids carried their story forward on their own. Every classroom made projects about kindness, about standing up, about what friendship really means. Eli gave a short speech. Simple. Honest. "They didn't make me brave," he said. "They just helped me remember I already was." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was steady. The kind that carries meaning instead of noise. That evening, as the sun went down, Don Vittorio parked his car outside the restaurant where it had all begun. The same parking lot, the same flickering neon sign. Inside, the same owner poured espresso, older but still quick with a smile. "You're early tonight," he said. "Didn't want to miss the quiet," Don Vittorio replied. He sat by the window, the reflection of the fading sky on the glass. On the wall behind him hung a photo someone had framed months ago, the one from that first morning at the school. The boy with his cast standing beside 70 men in suits, his small smile brighter than the chrome around him. Don Vittorio looked at it for a long time. Then he whispered. He asked for one day. We gave him forever. He finished his espresso, left a few bills on the table, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the light fading to blue. Across the street, a group of teenagers stood beside an old black sedan they'd been restoring. Not expensive like the Cadillacs, just an honest car their fathers had helped them fix. One kid wore a dress shirt too big for him, sleeves rolled up, with a small pin on his collar. On it engraved simply, "Protect the good." Don Vittorio smiled. Maybe this was how it worked. One good act passed like a flame, lighting the next, then the next. He started his engine, the familiar rumble filling the quiet. He didn't rev it. He didn't need to. The sound was enough, steady, human, alive. As he pulled away, the narrator's voice, soft, reflective, rose over the hum of the road. People say the world is full of bad men. Maybe they just never met the ones who chose to change. The scene widened, Eli waving from his front yard, his hand raised high as the line of black cars disappeared into the horizon. The sky blazed orange and gold. The engines grew faint, then silent, and for a few long seconds there was nothing but wind, sunlight, and the echo of kindness. Text appeared across the screen. Would you have been that child's friend? The image faded to black. Silence. Then just before the credits rolled, the faintest sound. A single engine starting again. Because some promises never really end.